Postal Service than I am, so I'll try not to screw this up too badly. I want to start with our nation's first postmaster. And I assume everyone knows that he was the first postmaster. Everybody may not know that he was actually the Postmaster General for the Crown in the 1750s, before there was America. And Franklin was relieved of his role for, quote, action sympathetic to the cause of the colonies. Now that's a PMG you could rally around. So in 1775, when the Continental Congress met, it created the post office and named Franklin the first Postmaster General. Now I think the Founding Fathers had it right. The first thing they did was establish the Postal Service. The second thing they did was hire a great guy to run it, and then they decided to found a country. So I think they had a pretty good strategy. Our Founding Fathers understood something. They understood and embedded in the fabric of our nation was the understanding that to create a nation, we needed a reliable system for government to communicate with the citizens, citizens to communicate with each other, and businesses to communicate with their customers. And so they created this thing called the Postal Service. And as our nation grew, so did the Post Office. The next little vignette comes from 1912, 100 years ago, when the Congress decided for the first time to let the Postal Service deliver packages. Now, in the period just before, as the nation was growing, the demand for the reliable delivery of packages had been growing with it. But unfortunately, a lot of the companies that sprang up to meet the need were unscrupulous and took advantage of both the shippers and the public. And so Congress, recognizing the huge natural advantage that the Postal Service's network provided, allowed the Postal Service to enter into this market, thus reducing prices, increasing reliability, and perhaps most importantly, giving a huge boost to the overall economy. Imagine that, a Congress who actually saw that a growing and prosperous Postal Service could be good for our nation. Finally, I want to mention events that many in this room witnessed firsthand and some played a lead role in. Now this is obviously dangerous ground because the first two, there's a history book, who knows what really happened. We've actually got people here who know something, so I'm going to tread very carefully. But I do want to try to make a point about what happened in the late 60s and in 1970 in the Postal Service. So in the late 60s, as everyone knows, the Postal Service was malfunctioning on a massive scale. Interestingly, while the mail was stuck in Chicago and elsewhere, the people who delivered it had the privilege of serving their nation during the day and stopping by the welfare office on the way home to pick up the food stamps to which their miserly wages entitled them. And so letter carriers stood up. They stood up for themselves, demanding the right to bargain and the better wages, hours, and working conditions that it would bring. And they stood up for the Postal Service, demanding that Congress allow it to do its job without the suffocating interference that had become the norm. And it worked. At least for a while, the Postal Reform Act and the collective bargaining rights it brought allowed the Postal Service to focus on delivering the mail and allowed the unions representing its workers to focus on beginning the long process of giving letter carriers and other postal workers a fair day's pay for their hard work. Now, what are the lessons we can learn from that history, from the three little vignettes that I shared with you? I think that history teaches us the three things we need to have a successful Postal Service. First thing from Franklin, you need a leader with vision who wants the Postal Service to win. From the events of 1912, you need a Congress who sees the value of the network and knows that by allowing the Postal Service to fill the network, everyone will do better. And from the events of 1970, I think we learned that if letter carriers don't stand up for themselves and this institution, nobody will. But when they do stand up, extraordinary things can happen.